Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving now to one of the most exciting sessions that we've been waiting for. And that is the session of our female CEOs for resilience. Can I please have your attention? Thank you so much. There's a lot of audio outside, and so I appreciate your attention in the room as well. Thank you very much. I'm going to call now on stage Madame Sanda Ojiambo, who, of course, we know is the Assistant Secretary General and CEO of the UN Global Compact. She's going to be in conversation with Madame Jane Karuku, the Managing Director and CEO of East African Breweries. Can we give them a round of applause, please? As they take their seats, I know we're going to do a quick photograph in seated position. But ladies and gentlemen, just to position the conversation as an opportunity to respond to the question of how leading businesses are responding to the question of resilience. And it's going to be a conversation between our two female CEOs starting in a second.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. First, Nosipo, really good to see you after years on the screen, and thank you for supporting all of our work at the Global Compact. So, as has been said, this is one of the most exciting sessions. Jane, no pressure on you.
No pressure, no pressure.
Because I'm just here to ask you the questions. But we're really going to talk about a couple of things: water, resilience, and leadership. And Jane is the managing director and CEO of East African Breweries Limited. She's a formidable female leader, commercially for the industry, and I think is a role model for many in Kenya as well. I'm going to Kenya and beyond, actually, I'd imagine. So I'm pleased to have this chat with Jane, and we're really going to reflect on some of the key themes coming out of COP, as well as key themes that work within our framework of work at the Global Compact. As you know, COP has talked about the intersection between climate, water, and oceans. We're also focusing a lot on adaptation and resilience. We're focusing a lot on the role of leadership in making those bold and courageous, commercial decisions and board decisions that allow us to look at how we allocate our resources, how we look at both balancing short-term goals and long-term goals for sustainability. A couple of reflections from a recent study that we did at the Global Compact. We had a survey done in partnership with Accenture last year that showed that nearly half of all of the global CEOs surveyed reported supply chain disruptions due to extreme weather events, and about a quarter said they did not have early warning systems or intermediate advanced scenario analysis to understand the impact that climate change was having on their business. So essentially, many CEOs remain ill-equipped to be able to address a lot of the challenges that come around from climate and climate action. Again, to contextualize a little bit further for the African continent, climate and its impacts, we see it all areas. North Africa, drought and famine recurring. South Africa a few months ago, there was floods and landslides. In West Africa, I don't know if you saw those incredible images of floods that reached the waist level of reporters. If it was me, because I'm short, it probably reached my neck. So I'd be really worried about that. And East Africa going through the most severe period of famine and drought. And this only doesn't affect communities, but certainly affects businesses and businesses that are trying to run successful and sustainable businesses. So I'm going to run through a couple of questions with Jane, just to get her views on leadership and what this means. So Jane, I just first wanted to start with the concept of corporate resilience, sustainable business and sustainable development, because, leaders will lead by a P&L. I'm sure you have a board that puts that pressure on you. You have shareholders who want to see the results. But I wonder, what does resilience mean to you, and how do you have those discussions with your board and with your team about the importance of factoring resilience, not just simply looking at your P&L and the bottom line?
Thank you, Sanda. You said there's no pressure, but you have a whole booklet of questions. I think resilience in a corporate setting is about thinking how you're going to survive the next N years. N meaning over 200 years, because our organizations have survived for so long. And therefore, in the boardroom, contrary to your view or the question you've just asked, it's not about that month's or that year's profit. It's about long-term survival. So therefore, in our strategic conversations, we look at end-to-end business touch points with the greater ecosystem, and how all those elements and the different players and partners are going to survive in the next 10 years. So like our business is from grain to glass. We buy from farmers barley and sorghum. We do a few good things within the organization, and then we deliver for the citizens to celebrate life every day. So that's our purpose.
So tell me though, and there's no one watching. If it was just me and you in the room, how difficult are these discussions? Or are you saying that your board and your leadership team are very attuned to this idea? Because I know a lot of CEOs that we talk to say it is difficult to balance long and short term decision making.
I think it's for you to survive long term, or even the other way around, for you to survive the short term effect, you also have to have your long term view. For example, in recent times, we have very many shocks. We have COVID. We had COVID and it was very serious. All our outlets were shut. If we did not have a long term view of the business, we would not have survived COVID. And we didn't fire anybody in the business. And it's because we've been thinking about long term, we had already thought about how do we innovate to deliver our brands to customers should X and Y happen. So we are always scenario planning. I'm not saying that it's easy because who could have predicted the Ukraine war? Who could have predicted COVID? But at least so long as you're willing as an organization to be agile and creative and to use and listen to everybody, your partners and other people, I think you can survive. But I'm not saying it is easy. It is tough.
Thank you. Then I think you should write the playbook or the rule book that a couple of leaders could borrow from. So, thanks for setting the scene about resiliency and some of those business decisions. I wanted to shift to the question of water, which I know is a key input for your products as a beverage company. I think both in terms of the actual beverage as well as the role that water may play in the agricultural value and supply chain that you support. So I'm curious to know, given the current situation of water insecurity and water stress, how do you build in water resiliency in your business plans?
I think the first thing we do is to understand what the actual problem. And like you rightly said, it starts from the farmers who are giving us grain and also the sources of water in country to support our manufacturing facilities. But lastly, our consumers as well, because if they are stressed in terms of hygiene and sanitation, they'll not enjoy our brands as much as we would like. So our view of the world is that we have to get involved with water availability at a micro and a macro level. So for example, with farmers, we work with research agencies, universities to develop seeds that are resilient to survive or thrive in. Okay, oh, it's back. So starting from grain, we work with research agencies with and farmers to develop great grains that can thrive in very difficult conditions. Internally, we've invested to save water usage in recycle and replenishment. And we give ourselves targets that every year we are going to save or improve our water efficiency 10% year on year. And then for communities where we operate, we try and provide them water, particularly for sanitation. So we use some of our profits, about 1%, we commit to water usage and other community or society stuff, and we replenish for them as well as for ourselves. So we do a lot of tree planting. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but we try to ensure that we are putting back what we've used back into the ecosystem.
Thanks. And I mean, looking at water as a public good, fully appreciating the efforts of your organization, I wonder whether you are able to effectively mobilize others in the beverage industry to do as you do, or others in other industries, and how you feel your companies make an impact for the country and the markets in which you operate.
Okay, first of all, we are a big company where we operate. We are very significant, 1% contribution to the GDP. So we take that role very seriously. So we try to catalyze a lot of issues within the ecosystem. We also work with partners. For example, we work with WaterAid. We work with your old company, Safaricom, as private sector to deal with certain issues. For example, right now what we are dealing with is afforestation, and we want to support the government of Kenya deliver 3 billion trees. We've seen in the last 10 years great progress towards afforestation. I think now we are 12% tree cover, 10% forest cover, which I think is great considering we came from 2%. So many things, but I think also to yourself, Global Compact, we are signatories of Global Compact. I think I need to keep showing off my badge. It's quite
There you
nice.
go.
And I think even with Sanders' organization support, just convening us together so we can even advocate to government for policy and for requisite regulation to support the agenda of environment. Yeah.
Great. And I think the next question I wanted to move on to is issues around leadership. And I don't know if you've seen, there's a picture going around about what the global leadership looks like at the political level of COP, and lots of commentary on that. But that's the world as is. Let's talk about the private sector. Yourself as a female leader, I mean, is it lonely where you are in your industry and certainly in the leadership circles where you play? And what do you think we need to do collectively to build and engage more female leaders?
I think that's a great question. I think, firstly, as on a personal note, I'm not a woman, I'm just a leader, and that helps. But on this, more to this question you've asked, I think if I give you examples of the organization I work in, we start nurturing female leaders from the bottom, right from graduate trainees. And then we give them a lot of support within the organization so that they can survive up the ladder, because we know women get cut off at certain leadership positions. The other thing we do is that we identify jewels, female jewels, earlier on in their career, and we support them as well with capability development, with mentorship and coaching, but more importantly, with opportunities to throw them into the deep end so that they can be seen and they can prove their worth. And we are not just doing it within the organization, we're also doing it with partners. So our farmer base is mostly women. Our bartenders, believe it or not, we are supporting them and training to have more bartenders who are women, which is quite odd in Africa, but so long as they see themselves as bartenders, not as female bartenders. We support DJs. We have the most, I think some of the most famous DJs in Kenya came through some of our brands, Smirnoff. So we are very deliberate as an organization to drive inclusion and diversity. And as the leader, I do have performance objectives every year to deliver. And more than that, I think the leadership of the organization which I work for, Diageo, they've called it as part of their performance ambition. So there's a money, there's a profitability, but there's also inclusion and diversity as a deliverable for us to be sustainable in the next 100 years. After all, the consumers are 50-50. So why would we be different in the organization?
That's very true. And I really like the example about how you have looked at gender not only from what happens at the leadership and management level, but into your supply chain and into other areas where your products and services are delivered. Okay, I see we have 5 minutes left. So, a last couple of questions I did want to ask you, Jane. I think, going back to the water question, going back to sustainability, as you've mentioned, I read a statistic once that we can sit and talk about how leaders need to influence sustainable business. We can be at forums where we'll talk about the great work that's being done. But apparently, after a survey that was done of about 1,000 job descriptions of CEOs, only 4% actually had real KPIs and real accountability measures around sustainability. So the question is, whether or not CEOs really do deliver on KPIs around sustainability. You've talked about water and your targets. You've talked about gender. How can we, should we do it differently? Should we do it better? How can we bring that all together in terms of performance management? And how do we measure that when a lot of the things are actually sometimes out of your control?
Every leader, every CEO looks at their strategy and delivers to strategy. So our strategy reflects all those KPIs, and we call ESG targets within our strategy, and we refer to them as Society 2030, and their environmental, social, and governance. And I, as a leader, do have all those targets in my annual performance review. But I think it's more than targets. It has to start from your heart. So as a leader, I have to own it, have to be emotionally connected to sustainability. And then combined with my own self, plus the targets I get, then it can happen. But I also want to tell you, Sandra, that companies who've called out ESG and are very passionate about that are more likely to survive the shocks we are talking about, the shocks of wars, the shocks of disruption, the shocks of the next big thing which will hit us, which I'm not sure. But it is important. And I want to confirm my incentive pay is based on deliverables of sustainability.
Well, that's great. And a last reflection, Jane. Last night you joined us at the launching of the Africa Business Leaders Coalition. And it's a coalition bringing together business leaders to highlight, lobby, discuss key issues for the African continent. Priority for the moment was climate. Do you want to share a little bit of your reflections on the Leaders Coalition, what you feel it may achieve, and its aspiration and ambition?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's a great initiative just to bring us together and to talk about these things because I think as an individual, we do reflect. I've just told you I have it in my objectives, performance objectives, but alone I cannot do much. So we need to come together and build partnerships and coalitions so that any cent that we invest, when it comes together, we can really be impactful. For example, the company I work has invested a lot of money, but we are just small in the ecosystem that we run. So when we get together with other leaders and across Africa, our investments will make sense and will have a real impact. Our voices will be louder, and therefore we can advocate either to people like this, the UN, or even our own governments to do the right things so that we can have a real impact and change and stop what we are seeing as a race to the bottom. And I think also it's quite inspiring when you're many of you because you celebrate each other. For example, in my own organization, we are excited. We're about to be net zero in 2 months. I want to shout about that and therefore catalyze what the other leaders do. And obviously, with your support, you have a bigger voice somewhere where we are not. So you can always take our voice into New York. Then we can achieve better.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, since the timekeeper is not waving me down, I will ask you a final question, which I heard as I was walking down the corridor, walking past the media, who said, sometimes it's very difficult to take all of the ambition and the complex discussions you hear at COP and make it make sense for the person on the street. We come from Kenya, our people in the village. What do you make of COP and how do you translate that to the person back home who's going to ask, what have you been doing in the last couple of days, or indeed your family or your kids?
I think the first thing I would tell, I'll give you an example. Just last week, I traveled through Kenya, and it's really, really dry. So if I travel again next week, I would say the reason it's very dry is because the rains don't come on time. And they tell me, yes, we agree. So what is a role that that person on the ground can do? You can plant a tree, you can conserve water, you can recycle water, you can trap rainwater. So there's so many things we can simplify from a core perspective to the person who matters. And I think that's our role as leadership. So as I leave COP, I'll be wondering what do I take to my organization from all the beautiful things that I've had and all the ambition that I've gathered this week. What can I interpret to the farmer? What can I interpret to the truck driver who supports distributing our brands? So I think it's a leadership. The onus is on leadership to simplify and cut it up to chunks that people can do it. So every little, every day. Remember our professor, Wangari Maathai, what she said. It just takes a hummingbird can put out a fire in the forest. We just need to do our bits, bit by bit.
Jane, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your leadership lessons, your perspectives on water resiliency, inclusivity. Thank you for all you do in terms of inspiring leadership and women leadership in Kenya and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's not much more that I can add to that other than just to emphasize it takes a hummingbird to put out a forest fire. And so that's the lesson that we're going to be taking with us. Maybe a final round of applause for our female CEOs, please.